It's crazy for me to even say this, but it's actually kind of true. I almost feel like, in a way, the Minnesota Vikings owe a lot of their success in 2019 to the Chicago Bears. And hear me out for a second. Hear me out. Early on in that season last year, Kirk Cousins was really bad. Now, it felt like head coach Mike Zimmer, offensive coordinator Kevin Stefanski was really focused on trying to minimize the opportunity for mistakes, and they were really playing it close to the vest, realizing they have a special player in Dalvin Cook in the backfield certainly makes that decision a little bit easier. But it was very obvious early on that it felt like they were scared of Kirk Cousins. They were scared of the potential for failure. They were scared of the potential mistakes and the bad plays and so forth. And it certainly felt like more than they really needed to be, which is really concerning if you're a Vikings fan, considering how much they had invested in him in free agency to bring him in and let him be that dude. You let Teddy walk as a result. You don't expect to come into the first quarter of the season and see a team play so scared like they were with Kirk Cousins as their starting quarterback. And you got to that Bears game in week 4, and the Bears defense just made them look silly. Like, that was the game you were looking at if you were a Bears fan. I know I certainly was, and saying, okay, the first 3 games, you know, horrible loss to open the season to Green Bay 10-3. Oh, the lucky ass win against Denver. Then the Monday night win against a really bad Washington team. You didn't really have much reason for hope or confidence about the Bears. And then you go into that Vikings game, and then you see that 16-6 win in just the dominant fashion in which they handled that team. Especially on the defensive side of the ball, the way they handled that Vikings offense, which did have playmakers such as Dalvin Cook and Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen. And you're saying, holy crap, the Vikings might be going this way, and the Bears might have finally gotten it together, and then, all that crap didn't happen. And it was like something conscientiously happened after that game where the Vikings kind of snapped out of it a little bit and realized that they couldn't play that same style the rest of the year. Like, it was the wake-up call that they needed. And, while I wouldn't say they exactly became ass kickers the rest of the regular season, it certainly had an impact. I think that was a pivotal moment in the Viking season because after those early season struggles, even the fact that they went 0-4 against the Packers and the Bears in the division, this is still a team that, when all was said and done, got more out of Kirk Cousins as the season went along. The offense was starting to do some good things, still had an adequate to pretty good defense at times. This is a team that ended up going 10-6 and sliding into the playoffs as a 6th seed. And especially heading into that wild card round, like, the odds were significantly against them beating the Saints. They were. The Saints, you could argue just as easily could have damn near had a right to be a 1 or a 2 seed, and here they are as a 3 seed playing in the wild card round. You got the Vikings coming in, and you could talk about, well, you had the Minneapolis Miracle and all of that, but did you really have faith or confidence that Kirk Cousins was going to be able to go in a big game, in a big situation, to be able to make enough plays to beat the Saints? And somehow, some way, I still don't fully know how it happened. Non-calls on offensive pass interference aside, the Vikings went into the Superdome and they beat the Saints. Like, that was an impressive victory. Now, sure, any hopes or optimism they had were quickly squashed by the 49ers in the divisional round in Santa Clara, but nonetheless, I still point back to that moment in time against the Bears in week 4. I thought that was a pivotal moment for this Vikings team. Now, heading into the offseason, gone is Kevin Stefanski. In comes Kerry Kubiak to officially take over the play calling duties where he was just kind of in the fold before. Stefanski, of course, got the head coaching job in Minnesota. He gave a little bit of an extension to Kirk Cousins, which as much felt like it was about clearing out salary cap space as it was like an indication of total support and confidence and belief in Kirk Cousins. But you lost some guys off of that defense. You lose Xavier Rhodes, you lose Trey Waynes and Mackenzie Alexander, you lose Linval Joseph, all gone. So these are all guys to different levels that, had some impact on the team. Although you look at Xavier Rhodes in 2019, you probably say that's not much of a loss at all, and I certainly wouldn't disagree. Probably the most notable loss of although was the trade of Stephon Diggs. Like, yes, you were able to get some good draft pick capital in return, and you got a first-round pick back for Stephon Diggs, but as a general rule, you don't want to be in that position where you're trading guys like that all the time. But maybe it was a point in time where it was time for Diggs to move and go somewhere else. Because you look at Diggs, like there were times where he really did not come across very well on the sideline as a top player, as a potential leader on a team. Like in a situation where your team still has a chance to win, and it seems like you're more worried about throwing bitch fits about not getting the ball than doing everything that you can to help your team contribute to win. You know, maybe this is a case of addition by subtraction a little bit. You add something to the chemistry and morale of your locker room by getting rid of a guy that at times could be a pain in the ass. It's unfortunate, but it's the way it is. Then you look at the notable move that they just made after Everson Griffin leaves and goes elsewhere. You trade for Yannick Ngakoue from the Jacksonville Jaguars. I like this deal for the Vikings because ultimately they didn't have to give up a first round pick to get him. And for a team that just had 2 first round picks in this 2020 draft, it's okay next year to not have that second round pick to get a guy like Ngakoue into the fold. What that means long term, in terms of contract situations with him and Danielle Hunter, remains to be seen. But you're looking at the production that you got out of Griffin in 2020, you get a younger version of similar level production out of Yannick in 2020, is the way I kind of look at it. In terms of the draft, I think they got a few guys that are potentially going to be able to contribute right away. Justin Jefferson from LSU. You look at him and you say, okay, he's not Jamar Chase level good, but this is a guy that can play. And this is a guy that may have a chance to actually contribute some as a receiver, as a rookie, especially he comes into a situation where Adam Thielen is already going to be the established number one, so he doesn't have to be the dude. He doesn't have that level of pressure on him. Jeff Gladney is certainly going to get the opportunity to play in that secondary because they've had all types of turnover back there. Ezra Cleveland in the second round. I think he's going to be looking at potentially starting the season at left guard, or if not, he'll eventually do so. Cameron Dantzler, another young guy in that secondary that's probably going to have some opportunity for playing time. Some changes certainly happened on this Vikings team, especially with the salary cap situation that they were in. You knew that was going to happen. I really like their draft class. I think some of these guys are going to come in and contribute right away, but I just wonder how much of a difference it's going to make for this team this season. In terms of reason for optimism, I think you look at the running game tandem of Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison. That's a pretty good 1-2 combo, and Cook is an absolute stud. It was criminal the fact they were able to draft him in round number 2. But you're talking about a team like you want to play in close games and win tough games. You want to be able to run the football. The Vikings should certainly be able to run the football. They've got a pretty nice edge rusher tandem of Ngakoue and Danielle Hunter. And if anything, you might argue that Ngakoue is a better fit for what Mike Zimmer wants to do than even Griffin was. So you have 2 guys that come off the edge and create some havoc and create some pressure. Then you look at the other levels of their defense and you say you still got the combination of Eric Kendricks and Anthony Barr. You've got the combination of Smith and Harris at safety. You got to feel pretty good about that. You still have some pretty notable, pretty good, top-level talent on this defense. So even though they've taken a little bit of a step back over the past couple of seasons, you got to feel pretty good, at least right now, if you're a Vikings fan, that they're not going to take much of a step back, if at all, in 2020. You potentially could see some improvement to previous performance standards. But that said, there are concerns and reasons for concern with this team. Where are the playmakers in terms of pass catchers outside of Adam Thielen? Justin Jefferson is a nice prospect, but he's still a prospect, and he's a rookie. And a lot of times rookie wide receivers do not contribute a whole lot, if at all. That certainly can happen. It certainly can. But a lot of times these guys can take a year or 2 to really get their footing and really get familiar and accustomed to the NFL game. And then you look at tight end. You can run a lot of 2 tight end sets, especially with Kubiak, I'm sure, with Rudolph and Irv Smith. But who's going to be that number 2 pass catcher opposite Thielen that can really make things happen? When you look at the offensive line, I still think that's a concern for them. They've invested quite a bit there in between free agency money and draft picks over the past couple of years. But you still wonder just how good that offensive line could really be. They need to take some steps forward in 2020 because if they don't, it's going to be bad news for that running game and as a byproduct, bad news for Kirk Cousins and that Vikings passing game. And then I look at their defense, and there are 2 kind of gaping holes to me. One is the interior of that defensive line. Who do you have that's going to be able to make plays there? Who's going to be there to really be a force against the run? I just don't know that I see it. And I look at the corner position. You're going to be playing Hughes and Gladney a lot. You're going to be playing, I would assume, Dantzler quite a bit. That's a lot of youth in the secondary. Part of the reason you probably had to make the Ngakoue trade after not keeping Everson Griffin is the fact that you knew you're going to have to get after the quarterback because you know your young corners could potentially struggle and struggle mightily at times. And that could certainly be the case. Again, some Vikings fans would say, well, what the hell is the difference between Xavier Rhodes and... Good point. Good point. But they better get to the quarterback because if they don't, Smith and Harris are only going to be able to save but so much. I look at this Vikings team, I still think they're a good football team. I don't think they're a great football team. I think they're a good football team, which is kind of represented by Kirk Cousins. He's a good NFL quarterback. He is not a great NFL quarterback. And if you don't have a great team around him, you'll probably be good, but that's about it. I look at the Vikings, and I think they maybe took a little bit of a step back this offseason. They've had some changes, and they were going to have some changes. I still think this is a team that can finish above 500. This is still a team that can potentially contend for the playoffs. Wouldn't surprise me if they dropped off and fell off a cliff a little bit, especially with the Mike Zimmer history of 1 year playoffs, 1 year not. Like, that is certainly a possibility. But I think they'll still be able to be in the mix. Like, I would be surprised if they weren't. But I do think, they're more of an 8 or 9 win football team as opposed to a 10 or 11 win football team. And if I was putting money down right now on a team to win this division, it's not going to be on the Minnesota Vikings.